One of the places the authority wound shows up most strongly in life is in marriage and long-term partnership. And for women, this dynamic often is deeply connected to our early experiences with our father and the expectations we learned early in life about what it means to be a man or a husband or a father. Growing up, many of us learned and absorbed ideas about authority and leadership within the family. Ideas about who's supposed to provide, who makes the decisions, who holds the responsibility, and where. Sometimes those messages came directly from our parents, and other times they were just perceived or observed or presented in some way. Sometimes they came from the culture or religion or environment we grew up in. And whether those experiences were positive or difficult or somewhere in between, they shape the way we unconsciously experience authority later in life, especially in our marriage and committed relationships. So when a woman enters a partnership with a man, those early authority patterns can quietly begin to surface, sometimes quickly and sometimes they show up slowly over time. Questions can arise like, or you can ask these questions to assess your relationship. Do I feel my voice matters equally in my marriage and relationship? Do I feel respected and valued? Do I trust my partner's authority, and do I trust my own? And sometimes those questions become even more sensitive depending on how responsibilities have been divided within the family. For example, many women are stay-at-home mothers or work-from-home caregivers while their partner is the primary financial provider. And while both roles are incredibly important, it can sometimes create an unconscious dynamic where the woman begins to feel like her authority or her contribution carries less weight, even if her partner doesn't actually see it that way. Society hasn't helped in this area either. This is one of the places where the inner authority wound can quietly surface, because the question underneath it is not about money or roles. The deeper question is about value and trust and authority. Do I see myself as an equal partner in this life we're building together? Do I trust my own voice and judgment? And do I feel safe expressing that within the relationship? I've personally had to reflect on this in my own marriage. There have been moments where I realized that some of the feelings I was having weren't actually coming from anything my husband was or wasn't doing. They were connected to a deeper authority pattern I carried from my relationship with my father and my early experiences with my stepfather, and from the messages I internalized growing up about what it means to be a man or a husband, and also what my role as a wife and mother should be. And honestly, what I observed left me feeling for a long time that those were things I never wanted for myself. But I'm so glad I began my personal growth journey, because now I cannot imagine my life without my husband or my son. And recognizing this was incredibly important for my own healing, because when we begin to see these patterns clearly, we can stop projecting them unconsciously onto our partners. In my case, I trust my husband with my feelings. I know he values me. I know he sees me as a strong and equal partner. And because that trust exists, our relationship has actually become a space where healing can happen. That doesn't mean the work is finished. That doesn't mean we've mastered it. Relationships are living things. Both people are always growing and changing, and oftentimes at different paces. Most of the time at different paces. But relationships have to grow together over time in some way, or naturally we begin to grow apart. And that kind of growth requires effort. It requires commitment, communication. It requires honesty, sometimes brutal honesty. And it requires a willingness to take responsibility for our own work, our own inner work. This is where the Saturn archetype becomes so important in marriage. Saturn represents maturity and responsibility and the work of actually building strong foundations. And relationships that last and that deepen over time always involve Saturn's work. They require patience, they require accountability, and they require both partners learning how to stand in their own authority while also respecting the authority of the other. When women and men begin healing their authority wounds and learning to trust their own voice and judgment, something beautiful happens. They begin to feel stronger within themselves, and they feel more respected, they feel more valued, and very often they're able to love their partner more deeply because they're no longer relating from an unconscious place of insecurity or power struggle. That kind of inner shift can transform not only a relationship and marriage, but a woman's entire life. Because when a woman stands in her own authority, she shows up differently in every other role she holds. As a partner, as a mother, as a leader within her life and her work and her family. And that's where real partnership begins to flourish. So what does the authority wound actually look like inside a marriage? There's a few common patterns that tend to show up once you begin paying attention to these dynamics. And most couples will recognize at least one of these patterns in their relationship at some point. The first pattern is what I call controller and the rebel dynamic. So this pattern is when one partner consciously or unconsciously steps into the role of authority. They may take responsibility for all the decisions, the finances, or organizing the household. Sometimes this comes from a genuine place of desire to support the family. But if the authority wound is active, it can start to feel like control to the other partner. And the partner on the receiving end may respond by resisting or pushing back or becoming defensive. This creates a cycle then where one person feels responsible for holding things together, while the other feels like they're constantly being managed or corrected. Over time, this dynamic can erode trust if it's not understood. Because what is really happening underneath is a struggle around authority and autonomy. The second pattern is the parent-child dynamic. This one can be especially subtle. Instead of two adults relating to each other as equal partners, one person begins to take on the role of the responsible parent, and the other begins to feel like the child in the relationship. This can show up in things like monitoring spending or correcting how things are done all the time, making decisions without fully including the other partner, or feeling like one person carries most of the responsibility. When this happens, resentment often begins to build on both sides because neither partner truly feels seen as an equal adult. And again, the deeper issue isn't specific to the task or the disagreement. The deeper issue is authority and respect. The third pattern is authority avoidance or decision deferral. So this happens when someone gives their power away. Instead of standing confidently in their own voice, they defer decisions to their partner. They may avoid expressing their disagreement, or they may quietly accept situations that don't actually feel fair or balanced. And this pattern often comes from a desire just to keep the peace in the relationship. Over time, it can create its own form of imbalance because one partner ends up carrying weight of the authority while the other feels incredibly disconnected from their own voice. What's really important to understand, though, is that these patterns are rarely intentional. Most couples are not consciously trying to control each other or give their power away. They're simply reacting from an old authority pattern that formed much earlier in life. And this is why awareness is so powerful, because once you begin recognizing these patterns, you can start shifting them. Instead of reacting automatically, you can begin responding consciously. You can pause and ask yourself, is this really about the present moment? Or is this touching on an authority wound that still needs healing? This is where the deeper work of Saturn begins inside a relationship and a marriage. Saturn represents the work of building strong foundations, and relationships that truly last are not only built on romance and chemistry, they are built on trust. Trust that both people are willing to grow, and trust that both people are willing to communicate honestly, and trust that both people are willing to take responsibility for their own patterns. That kind of trust does not appear overnight either. It is built slowly over time through patience, through accountability, through hard work, through a willingness to keep showing up for the relationship, for yourself, for each other. That's the Saturn work. And while that work can sometimes feel challenging, it's also what creates the deepest and most meaningful forms of love. I can attest to this, having cultivated a strong, loving partnership and marriage myself over the last 17 years. When women begin healing their authority wounds and stepping into their inner authority, something really powerful begins to shift in their relationships. They begin to trust their own voice. They begin to feel more confident expressing their needs and perspectives. And they begin to see themselves as equal partners in the life they're building with their spouse. And that shift, I promise you, changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. Because when one person begins standing more fully in their own authority, it invites the other person to grow as well. And healthy marriages are not static. They evolve, they deepen, they grow through challenges that both partners are willing to face together. Marriages don't just reveal love between two people. It also reveals their relationship with authority. And when we begin to understand the authority wound, we gain a powerful new lens for understanding our relationship patterns. But not as failures, as opportunities for growth and healing. When women learn to trust their own inner authority, their marriages often become more balanced, more respectful, and more deeply connected. I've seen this with working with many clients over the years. They feel more confident in themselves, they feel more loved and valued, and the sense of inner strength naturally flows into every other part of their lives. Relationships are living, evolving partnerships. And like anything meaningful in life, they require care and patience and effort. And that's the work of Saturn. But when two people are willing to grow together, even imperfectly, even at different paces, the relationship itself can become one of the most powerful places of healing and transformation. If this topic resonates, stay tuned because I'm going to explore the authority wound and how it shows up in other relationships like parenting, the workplace, relationships with bosses, and even in friendships. And let me know if you have experienced any of these patterns in your relationships and partnerships and how you've managed them. And has astrology helped? And if you would like to explore your astrology and connect for a consultation, I'd love to work with you and your partner if they're open to it. And also go back and listen to the videos I've done on Saturn through the signs for the authority and father wound perspective, and consider how that pattern may have played out in past relationships or is maybe currently playing out in your marriage or committed partnership now. Because once you start recognizing these patterns, it becomes much easier to shift them. And that's where real growth and empowerment begins. Wishing you all the best in all your relationships, friends. Take care, and I'll see you back here soon for more.